Well, good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Uzra Zaya, the CEO and President of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I want to welcome you to this breakout session and thank you for joining us at PeaceCon. We're here to discuss a very important topic, understanding digital risks to peace, and also going beyond talk towards common cause and hopefully collective action in charting a plan for social cohesion in virtual spaces. Now, why is this topic so important? I don't think I need to persuade any of you. We are all living through, quite literally, the digital transformation of everything. You know, as our lives have been upended by the global pandemic, AFP has had to make that pivot and shift the entirety of our work online, and the fact that we're able to connect with all of you with peace builders from 106 countries, that's the level of participation in PeaceCon 2020, I think speaks to the opportunities and the way that our lived experience is changing before our eyes. I think we've all also experienced a mass migration of humanity. We speak so much of the nearly 80 million people who are displaced from their homes all over the world, but we've also experienced, just in the last decade, a movement of 3.5 billion people, nearly half the population of the planet, onto the online world. And of that 3.5 billion, 1/3 of them are users of social media. And that in itself has a tremendous transformative impact on their lives. These are some of the reasons why AFP launched a working group on technology and social media last year, which I'm proud to co-chair with AFP Senior Fellow Lisa Shirk. It's also a reason why we've really tried to spark and initiate these conversations at PeaceCon 2019 and PeaceCon 2020. So I think going into this conversation, we can all appreciate that there have been historical and perceived and very real divides between the ways that peace builders and technology companies look at the intersection between social media and conflict. And I think I only need to mention a few case examples: Myanmar, Sri Lanka, India. But at the same time, I think we have to grapple with these twin competing dimensions of the technology and peace question. Obviously, the need to contain and mitigate the disruptive impacts, the incitement to violence that we see, almost at a fever pitch, particularly, I would say, in the United States. But balancing this with the imperative to embrace and master ICT, information communication technology, as a peace building tool, and really as a potential engine and driver for social cohesion. So that's some of the frame of today's discussion. We do have 3 objectives where we hope in this 90 minutes we can help together learn more concrete methods for understanding risk and resilience around social media and conflict, and hear directly from the experience and expertise of frontline peace builders all over the world. 2, we want to gain a better understanding of the common and divergent ways that peace builders and tech companies analyze risk and resilience. And finally, we want to really draw upon all of your perspective and experience and ask you, the audience, to help us co-create a list of potential areas for collaboration to tackle these challenges. Fortunately, we have an all-star panel with us today to help guide us with deep expertise in frontline peace building, in research, and from the tech industry itself. We have Lisa Shirk, AFP Senior Fellow for Policy and Senior Research Fellow at the Toda Peace Institute, where she directs the Social Media Technology Peacebuilding Program. We have Danjuma Dawop, the Head of Conflict and Social Cohesion for Mercy Corps in Iraq. And this is, Danjuma is leading a multiple donor-funded peace-building, social cohesion, and governance program in Iraq that is really bringing a new strategic vision to conflict management and social cohesion, working to bridge the gap between civil society and government policies through promoting reconciliation. We're also fortunate to have with us from Search for Common Ground in the Central African Republic, Bay, the head of the CAR program for Search, where he leads 24 peace builders and media professionals working to prevent atrocities and violence and build social cohesion. And finally, we have with us Kylie Holmes, who manages global crisis and disaster programs at Facebook, including programs in conflict-affected countries, aiming to understand and reduce the risk of online harm. So I'd love to turn to our panel of experts and practitioners, starting with Lisa. Lisa, if you could kick off this huge topic, given your extensive work in this space, what do you see that's new and different in terms of how we can integrate our understanding of social media's contribution to conflict? And then more reflectively, on the flip side, where do our old ways of analyzing conflict as peace builders hold up?
Lot. I have a PowerPoint. I think my colleague Lisa Inks is going to push it over. It's just a 5-minute, very quick presentation. So the Total Peace Institute in 2019 did a project in 13 different countries to look at how social media was impacting both peace building and conflict. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So, oh, whoops, back to the map. All right, so these are the countries. So we really focused on the Southern Hemisphere. We did do Myanmar and Sri Lanka, having local research in those countries. Tell us more about sort of the process that civil society went through in trying to gain the attention of Facebook, that there were issues. But then we wanted to also get to other countries like Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela in Latin America, as well as Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. Jordan, Northern Ireland. We wanted to do some diverse contexts to really see how, conflict assessment is a bit different in every country because the local political system, economic system is unique. And in this case, the broader media ecosystem really is unique. Next slide. One of the things that we found was consistent in all of the case studies is that the flow of information to the public is dramatically changed through social media. In the past, we call it legacy media. Journalists wrote stories. There were media owners and editors who were the gatekeepers of information, making sure it was truthful in most contexts or in many contexts, and really shaping what the public heard. And that had pros and cons. So the next slide is you have the social media model for communication where anybody in the world on social media can communicate with anybody else. So the speed, the scale, the scope, the searchability, sort of this vastly changes the way human beings communicate. And of course, the big thing that we're seeing in all of these 13 case studies is that disinformation is far more prevalent now. And it's anybody can make up a lie and share it. And it can seem credible to people. And so that's different for those of us who are doing peace building, sort of the scale of misinformation, disinformation, both intentionally shared and unintentionally shared information. So next slide. We came up with this model. It looks complex, but it's really just trying to say there's really different parts here. There's those 12 unique factors of characteristics of social media. And then there's the basic design of how social media platforms, what we call the tech engines, works. So the profit model is surveillance capitalism. It wants our attention. It has algorithms that favor, in many cases, hate speech and disinformation, because those are very emotional ways of engaging. And these kind of play upon the most vulnerable parts of society, our vulnerable brains, so the emotional core of our brains, if we're thinking neuroscience. It's the vulnerable polarization within all of our studies, which precedes social media. It's not because of social media, but so somehow social media is like a wedge amplifying some of that polarization. And then the vulnerable institutions, the inability really for legacy media and for governments in many countries to catch up. So this cascade of impacts that are all actually related to each other, we saw in pretty much all of the 13 countries. Next slide. And so, you know, we wanted to have techno optimism that social media can help us by democratizing information access, by allowing citizen journalists to tell stories of human rights abuses, that it could empower democracy activists and increase the freedom of speech. And social media does all of those things. But unfortunately, most of our case studies came down on social media is having a net negative impact on their countries because their governments are increasing authoritarian surveillance, disinformation is more popular, polarization is increasing, and the spread of violent extremism here in the United States with white supremacist groups, but in other countries, in our Nigeria context, it was Boko Haram who is very efficiently using social media. Next slide. And so this chart really captures, these are just 10 of the countries, the patterns that we saw across so many of the contexts is that there's just this really negative social media to increase social conflict and political conflict, really to undermine democracy. Next slide. And so in terms of what does our field of peace building really need to do in this moment, we see there's this trifecta, of course, of government, civil society, and tech companies that we need to be coordinated, working together to try to address these challenges. And because peace building has always been really grounded in local peace builders taking action, that's a lot of where our work has focused. We put out this report on 25 spheres of digital peace building and peace tech a few months ago on the Toda Peace Institute website that tries to just list all the various positive uses of technology for peace building. And then the next slide, this fall, we also participated in this, we led this Digital Peace Factory contest. And I'm going to put in the link that right now, the voting for this. So we invited peace builders to create digital peace building content like memes and GIFs around the US election to try to depolarize. So we have a couple of videos on our YouTube channel for the Digital Peace Factory. We invite you to like our social media channels and to just see all the different content people came up with. So these are some of the ideas that we have for going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And my own vote would be for the cat in the suit meme, which reminds me of my own. So thank you for that. On that note, I want to turn to Danjuma and Michelle, two frontline peace building leaders doing vitally important work in some very challenging contexts. So Danjuma, let's start with you. I'd love for you to share how you and Mercy Corps are thinking about the ways that social media contributes to conflict. And as we look at this frame of risk versus resilience, what are the main risk factors that you see in your context in Iraq, and how are you addressing them? Danjuma, I think we still have you on mute. If you can please unmute, we'd love to hear.
Yes, sorry, I was even thinking that my internet was a little bit bad, but can you hear me? A little bit erratic. This is Iraq, so sorry. So thank you so much, Uzra, for having us in this panel. And I think it's really, really important that we come together to discuss the threat of social media to peace, especially in a global settings like Iraq. And so just say that Mexico of this for years and about how existing tensions. And so with funding from Facebook, Mexico was able to conduct a research to assess the risk in terms of how social media is weaponized and how they also interact with the context and then also exacerbate existing tension. So based on this risk assessment, I'm going to talk about the content, the factors that actually have those. So the first one I want to talk about is the sources of risk. The sources of risk, we look at three factors. One is the intergroup conflicts because of social media availability. A lot of groups or threats, people feel threatened by other groups, and so they tend to use social media to kind of express that source of vulnerability. The second one, governance failure. As we have seen all over the globe, as a result of the pandemic, government were unable to meet the people. It's more so of Iraq. And so extremist groups like ISIS have been using this government failure to control the virus, and also making sure that their narratives and their conspiracy theories are pushed forward. The third one I want to talk about is the economic frustrations. Because of the COVID, there are a lot of tensions arising within Iraq at the moment. Salaries are not being paid as a result of the lockdown. People are unable to go to work. And so that had led to a lot of adjustment. And then again, as a result of all camp closing, a lot of IDP camps are being closed at the moment, meaning that a lot of IDPs are moving to their areas of origin. And people are actually on social media to say, oh, we don't want this into our communities because they are carrying COVID. So this has also fit into the existing context and exacerbating the tension. So the other factor I wanted to talk about is the way to harm, how all this happens within the context in which we work. And so one of them is the exploitable digital ecosystem. As we all know, the digital is not controlled, and so people kind of use it whatever means they want to do. And so you find in Iraq especially, whereby disputes probably that are actually social media is used to actually give it a, what we call clan cohesion, because clan in Iraq, I think, is more important. People are more aligned to their clans than even their religious group. And so people use social media to actually demonstrate or to personal dispute, to say, oh, it's around and you find community engulfed in conflict. The second factor I want to talk about is the malign influencers. These are people with influence. Actors, religious leaders who are very, very influential, and they are very, very active on social media. And use this at any point that they want to. For instance, when during the effect of the pandemic, most of these religious leaders went on social media to say, if you are an adherent of a particular religious sect, you cannot catch COVID. Or government is using the social media to on your freedom. And so we see that happening. We also see some political actors actually using social media to highlight their identities and pictures of people that had attended a particular training or an event that is funded by a particular donor that they don't like. And so they put those people at risk. And so those are some of the things that this line acts use in terms of their influence on social media. The third factor I want to talk about in terms of the pathway to have is the window of risk. These are situations that we always see are kind of cyclical, whereby when they happen, when those events happen, especially maybe a religious festival, maybe elections, maybe pilgrimage in Iraq. Those are potential, they potentially lead to violence. So in October, in the anniversary of the 2019 protests, some of these religious leaders were coming out using the social media to highlight that anybody that protests against the government is a saboteur, saying that people should, how people should protest what was used, that they should not use words about like use of they should not also talk about corruption. They should not talk about how the political system is divided along a religious line. We see that happening in Iraq. We also see, sorry. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I lost you for a minute. Can I ask all our audience members who are not presenting, please to mute, so we can make sure we don't have any interference. Appreciate everybody. I see a few folks are still not muted. Appreciate folks muting so we can hear clearly from Danjuma. Please proceed.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So the last thing I want to also mention is the election. So we have an election coming up in Iraq in June, and we have seen a lot of social media activities talking about, especially now with the issue of the vaccine. A lot of these political actors are actually using it as a platform for campaigning. Some were saying they are going to make sure that they get they are the ones that can get the vaccines accessible to people. They are going to do that. So we see that happening. And so this is because of the election. What else Mexico to deal with the issue? So we have been working with communities, you know, building the capacity of community leaders, especially to identify resolve dispute. Now we have also added to their repertoire of conflict materials, issues around disinformation and propaganda for them to identify disputes that are around disinformation and misinformation, conspiracy theories, and be able to analyze this kind of dispute and also resolve them. We also see how extremist groups like ISIS have been very, very active on social media, and they have been targeting the youth. And so we are also using the youth to counter this. And so we have what we call youth action groups within the communities in which we work, who are very active on social media, who are also providing verifiable, credible information about the COVID, about anything that has to do with movement of people, either IDPs or movement of people who are perceived to be seen to be carriers of COVID. Youth also active, not even part of our program participants, but they are very influential on social media. And these influencers, we use them to provide information to communities who could not get this kind of information. We are also working around the platform whereby Mexico is currently chairing a peace and reconciliation working that brings all peace building actors in Iraq together. And so one of the things that we are now trying to do is to ensure that they are also taking into consideration the impact of social media on the conflict context in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danjuma, for such a comprehensive and really thought-provoking presentation on the many different dimensions to which social media intersects with conflict and drivers of division and violence in Iraq. I'd love to turn now to Michel, again, the head of Search for Common Ground in the Central African Republic, and ask you, Michel, could you offer us an overview of the ways that Search and you think about risk in social media, and especially some of your multi-stakeholder work to address these issues? And Michelle, you're still on mute. If you could unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you. There you are. Thank you. Michelle, I'm still not able to hear you. Maybe let's just try again or get a little closer to the mic. I see you're unmuted. Unfortunately, I'm unable to hear you. Do you want to try just reconnecting if you have an outer mic, or? The video is coming in really clear. We'll just give this a moment. Mike, while we're waiting for Michelle to get his connection, or Michelle, do you want to try to come back in and connect? Okay. Great.
Maybe you can go ahead and ask other questions. Maybe I can continue, and then when he joins, he just take over.
Okay, sure. Mike Jobbins, while we're waiting for Michelle to see if he can come back in, would you like to start off and speak a bit about a searcher's perspective in CAR as to the issue?
Sure, absolutely. I don't know if I can do justice.
No, exactly.
I hope my mic is coming in okay.
It is. And
Good,
sorry
good.
to put you on the spot, Mike.
No, absolutely. I'm glad to be with such a wonderful group and to be following on both Danjuma's presentation, but then also the set of issues that Lisa laid out. I think, Search for Common Ground around the world work in a wide number of societies that have very different levels of technological penetration and use. Central African Republic, as many on the call will know, is one of the places that has seen some of the most radical transformations in the education environment, in the ability of people to raise their voices in all sorts of ways. For a 6-year-old woman in the Central African Republic, when she was born, there were probably 500,000 TV sets on the entire continent of Africa. She was lucky enough to have a radio station. The only thing she could listen to would be a station run by the Catholic Church or by the colonial powers at the time. And today she's on WhatsApp. And although there's only perhaps 2% of the population that's connected, it's a dynamic group, and we know that over the next decade, around the world, 1 billion people will come online, and many of them will be in places like this, where technology will bring its full set of promise, but also the full set of challenges. We lived through as an organization, and some of us personally, through the crises that the Great Lakes of Africa experienced, when cheap radio transmitters brought the promise of democracy and freeing up the media environment, but also brought a very real danger and harm to people in Rwanda, where the same power of voice was used for ill, as well as it held the promise of democratizing the public landscape. And so the work that Michelle is leading, and I hope he can.
I see Michelle has just rejoined.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent, Michelle. So I just gave a bit of a background about sort of the Central African Republic and our approach there. But if you can take it away, Michelle, and highlight some of the work that you've been doing related to hate speech these past few years, and some of the multi-stakeholder efforts that you're leading with the authorities, with civil society, but importantly with media, both broadcast as well as social media. So over to you, Michelle, and how you're shaping the really dynamic and exciting landscape of a new connected Central African Republic.
Hello, Michelle. I hope you're able to we're able to hear from you. I see that you're on the call. I see you're unmuted. Oh, well, everyone, I think we're going to keep trying with Michelle's audio, and really this is what we have to deal with in terms of you know, a virtual global online event. But Michelle, I'm hoping we'll get the connection, and when we'll give it another try. I think it maybe makes most sense to move on to Kylie at this point. And Kylie, you know, we've heard from Danjuma in great detail, you know, how the impact of social media can really affect across the board conflict drivers within a conflict affected country. And Mike also put in perspective just the incredibly almost head spinning transformation that's occurred on the ground in CAR, and we've seen over the last few years. I mean, just what a challenge it has been to take a peace building approach in a country that's been so racked by internecine violence. So Kylie, turning over to you, you know, with your responsibility for Facebook's global crisis and disaster programs, I wanted to ask, has Facebook's thinking about the risk factors for social media with respect to conflicts contexts, how that's evolved, and what are the conditions, the risks and factors that you're most focused on in your role for the company? And thank you for joining us, Kylie.
No problem, yeah. And hopefully I can also do justice to the work that we're doing with some of our partners, many of whom are on this call. So I will do my best. And also apologies, I'm going to have sun probably coming into my face and I'll be dodging it while I speak. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll start with a really country specific example and then go back to like a global picture and dial back into sort of what we're hoping to achieve in the, you know, in the year or two ahead. I mean, I think what you'll see us do regularly is essentially, you know, I think we've had a real reckoning ourselves, and we, you know, have acknowledged ourselves of the challenges that we faced, you know, even just a few years ago in places like Myanmar, where we were too slow to act on the abuses on our platform, including things that were being flagged to us from partners. And it was really due to a lot of challenges around reporting flows, some dual font issues, for example, and even challenges with language capacity on our side, and people who we didn't have full-time employees that spoke many of the languages that we were seeing spoken on our platform. And so, you know, we've really taken the last couple of years to invest in enhancing our ability to detect bad content, and in many cases to remove it. And a lot of that work has gone into the really operational investments that have taken place in, you know, hiring additional staff to review content, investing more in partnerships, and setting aside an entire team of experts on the product, policy, and partnership side to really focus on this dynamic between online content and offline harm. And so what we're seeing is that now today, we feel like we're in a much better place to address some of these harms and also reduce risk in places like Myanmar, for example, where in the most recent election, actually, we felt pretty good about the company's performance in that event. It could have been much worse than it was. It certainly wasn't anything like we've seen in the past. So these investments are really paying off. But I think what it comes down to is that we've really realized that we can't do this alone. And this is something that for a tech company and for the tech industry is sometimes difficult to accept. You know, we love to feel like we can take down any problem, we can hire the best and brightest and you know, engineer our way, you know, to a solution. And I think on something like this that really requires on the ground expertise and input from partners that live and work in many of these places, particularly this year when we are not able to travel, our research teams aren't out in the field, we really require relationships with organizations that have a presence on the ground and that deep contextual knowledge that comes with working in a place for, you know, 20, 40 years and speaking local languages. So this is where we've really placed a lot of investments in the last couple of years, and is really where a lot of my work is focused, is on building these relationships with partners, trying to find ways for partners to provide input directly, not only to the policy team, but directly to our product teams as well, so that we can receive feedback that may not be related to a specific piece of content, but more contextual feedback that might help us build better tools to proactively detect bad things. And so I think, quickly, and I know we only have 5 minutes, so quickly to describe kind of how we're thinking about this is, we have a really rigorous and systematic framework now for prioritizing resources for specific countries. We look at the situation on the ground. We look at our own data. We take stock of different events that are happening both now and in the future, like elections. And we pull it all together in a framework and basically assign teams of experts internally to focus on different countries. And there are 60 or more countries that are now slated for work on our side. So it's a pretty rigorous system and approach. But we also know that we have blind spots, which is why we work with organizations, say like Mercy Corps and Search, to provide feedback to us. And in fact, Mercy Corps has provided us with some research, to help us understand where we have gaps in our knowledge. And, and we do have gaps in our knowledge. And so I think it's important to recognize that and to know that, we know we have to solve this through working with others. And part of this, I'll say, and, I say this to our partners a lot, but we really feel a sense of urgency around this right now, in that the trend for online populations and social media is that people are moving to encrypted formats. And we ourselves, we own an encrypted format, WhatsApp. On those platforms, even we as a company, we are unable to see the content on those platforms. And so we really feel like the moment is now, the time is now to really understand these dynamics on the platforms where we can actually see and interact with the content, like Facebook and Instagram in our cases, and take this next year, 18 months, to really understand how online content interacts with offline environments, try and reduce risk to offline harm, and do that now in a way that is comprehensive and cohesive, so that when populations do move to these encrypted platforms, oops, we got some noise in the background. But when populations move to these encrypted platforms, since we won't be able to see the content, we really need to spend this critical time now with partners and understanding the interplay between the online and offline environments. That way we can build tools, including in the encrypted formats, to try and mitigate these risks before they happen. So that's kind of why we're feeling a sense of urgency, not only because we obviously want to reduce risk to populations globally and people who are using our tools, but also because we see the trends and, do feel like we have a limited amount of time to really truly understand how these things interact and build tools to address them. And also ready populations to understand how they play into this and what their role is. And I'll conclude by saying, I think one of the most consistent things that we're seeing is that our inputs from communities themselves is very uneven. So social media works really well when people who are using social media self-police. So they report content that they see that is concerning, that flags it for us, including on places like WhatsApp, and allows us to take action. But because we don't see a consistent amount of reporting in many of the places where we have the most concerns, for various reasons, maybe people don't feel comfortable with reporting, they don't know how to report, there may be literacy issues, but also in that people feel like it's a black box, or maybe something akin to reporting something to a government that they may not trust. Because we don't have this consistent level of reporting, we don't have signals from many communities, and we aren't able to build the proactive the tools and the AI to go out and find this content before it exists on the platform. And so a lot of our work with organizations like Mercy Corps and Search is really in this space as well, where we're looking at increasing the amount of signal coming from communities so that we can improve our proactive detection methods to really drive that, that number of removing content that is violating before it exists on platform, to take that from where it is now. In some countries it's at 90% or 95%. In other countries it's much lower. We really want to get that number up so that overall we can say with confidence that we're removing content, at a rate of like 9 out of 10 or 95% of the time. So that is where we are, and that's why we really value the work that we're doing with many of you.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And I really appreciate your making the point about the trend line towards more encrypted platforms. And I think it really gives all of us something quite profound to think about, when we're so akin to the environment we're in and content management versus what that means. I would note there have been a couple of requests, Kylie, in the chat, if there are any online documents you can share about some of the ways you describe Facebook as addressing these issues. Before we move to Q&A, I'm happy to report that Michelle Bay, the head of Search for Common Ground in Central African Republic, has succeeded in calling in. So I think we want to try to give Michelle one more opportunity to weigh in here. Michelle, would you like to?
Hi, Yusra, can you hear me now?
Yes, very clearly. Wonderful.
Yeah, great, wonderful. Yeah, actually, let me just jump to the intervention. Thank you for Mike for introducing the work we are doing in CAR right now. I just wanted to point the fact that social media is relatively new in CAR. CAR is a country which is very vast, and one specific about CAR that everyone knows is that 2/3 of the country is controlled by armed group, non-state armed group. So one of the most important tools that non-state armed group use to do the propaganda or to communicate is social media. And also social media internet penetration rate in CAR is quite low. It's below 2%, and but very much influential. I can give some anecdotal story that was on the UN operation that was in 2018 that turned bad. Actually, the operation was to install peace and freedom of movement in one quarter of the capital, Bangui. But the operation went bad because collateral damages occasion some church, and this church was burned, and this was related so much in the social media and led to violence, and violence against who? Against the UN peacekeeping mission and against UN peacekeeping workers, for instance. So just to give you some sort of idea how social media is quite more influential, even in a fragile state where there's very low internet penetration rate. And one other risk is that we have the issue around misinformation, fake news, and also the long spread of rumors. And another story is about the church that was blew up due to collateral damages. There was one video in the social media where you could see some UN peacekeeping military who were dancing. They were dancing. On something else. But the video was trying to show that they were dancing because they were very happy that they blew up a church. So see how the interpretation can lead, can incite communities to violence, actually. So within that framework, we as Search for Common Ground, we thought that it's very important to engage all the stakeholders, because whenever we discuss about social media, it's really good to look at the overall picture. See the government, the radio station, the journalists, who most of the time, the media who most of the time publish news, sometimes fake news, and also see how you can engage them, to all the stakeholders, to work collaboratively to understand the challenge they face and to agree to solution together. So within that framework, we were able to work with the Haut Conseil de la Communication, which is the CAR media regulator. Yes, and also with the National Youth CAR Association, and also the CAR Bloggers Association. Those are youth who are very much activists and in the social media platform when it comes to the CAR sphere. So the idea to engage them was to see how we can equip them to see how they can counteract hate speech and rumors together in a collaborative way. And one thing that we are really happy that so far is that they have this, even though the project ended, they have this tendency now to verify information, to sit together and to sign joint, to decide on joint action on how to counteract rumors and hate speech online and offline as well. Because one aspect is that it's not only good to think online, but also to give the opportunity that some information that can be corrected even on traditional media like the radio, even though it happened on social media. And one thing is also important to mention is that during our ongoing, we're having right now an ongoing intervention with the support of Facebook, which is geared toward creating a safer space for online engagement in CAR. So within the framework of that intervention, we are working with the media. Their role is to oversee the media landscape, the social media landscape of CAR. We identify all the Facebook pages that are really most visited in online platform, and make sure that we track inflaming narratives, hate speeches that we can flag to Facebook. They can be written in French, English, or even in Sango language. So that's the current work we are doing now. We are very much excited to see the result that we will bring out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I think it's a wonderful way to close the initial panel comments with those really compelling examples of how you're contending in such a difficult environment and problem solving through a multi-stakeholder approach. With that, I wanted to open the floor. You know, we've got great participation, over 60 folks online. We were looking at moving the discussion to smaller breakouts so we could hear from more of you kind of on a more one-to-one basis about how you see these issues playing out in your own community or your own work. But before we do that, I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to post some questions or to react to what you've taken in so far. And we can use the hand raise function or the chat. Well, maybe folks are reflecting a bit. So I'll put a question to all four of our panelists, which is, can you think of one way that you would see that peace builders need to adapt their approaches to so many of the factors you described so well of this moment in terms of analyzing and preventing conflict with respect to social media risks?
I'll jump in. Yes.
So let me. Oh,
go ahead, please. Danjuma, go ahead.
Please. All right. Sorry. So I'm because of my be blank, so you won't see my face as I speak. So as I mentioned earlier, with funds from Facebook, we are able to develop a risk framework. And one thing I didn't mention was that we apply this in cases in Myanmar, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Iraq, where I work. And what we discovered was that there is consistency in terms of how, for instance, malign influencers use social to exacerbate tensions. In Ethiopia, we see politicians and influencers using social media in Myanmar, as somebody mentioned with Rohingya Muslims, it was the social media were used to lead to this. In Nigeria, we have the Farmer Hada, crashes the Boko Haram extremist group using social media, as this I also mentioned. And so we have seen those things happening. And so for us in Mexico, we are digging deeper to understand how the online interaction actually exacerbate tension offline, how so many people who are online are able to influence, how people, very, very few people who are online could influence a large number of people offline to be able to push them towards a particular, using a particular narrative. And so we are using our, for instance, in Iraq, we are using our influence and our reputation as the co-chair for the Peace and Reconciliation Working Group to bring together peace-building actors to actually gain that support and momentum for them to be able to analyze in their field of work in terms of how social media also exacerbate tensions within the communities in which we work. Actually, after this, I think next week, I'm going to give a presentation to the Peace and Reconciliation Working Group members about this. And so we want to create a kind of a push and find a lot of momentum, create a lot of momentum to ensure that our communities are aware of what is happening.
Thank you, Benjamin. That's just a great example of, taking a collective approach and, not just one organization or, one community, but really having as many voices and actors involved in the response. We have a couple of more questions in the chat that maybe I'll combine for the panelists, some good ones in terms of how do you see the role of the education sector in mitigating or furthering the issues you've discussed, specifically teachers or professors as peace builders? And then another question about how you all see virtual reality technology and can it help invoke empathy for conflicting parties to, put themselves in another one's shoes? Two great questions.
Yeah, I think those are related questions. And I'm really glad, Kylie, you're here and that we're opening this conversation with Facebook again. So I think the field of peace building has just a tremendous amount to bring to these challenges. From the human rights community, they've done a little bit on counter speech, sort of how to counter disinformation and how to counter hate speech. But it actually comes down to the basic conflict resolution skills that we've been working on, and the importance of empathy and dignity. And I think peace builders, we can do more to learn how to translate our communication skills into really effective ways of handling challenging disinformation online through private links and sort of private conversations on the side that really invoke that sort of relationship and an empathy and going into those communication skills that we've been teaching for so long. And I think that virtual reality can also really be important for this in terms of really trying to get that human dignity across in these challenging situations. So I hope that more peace builders get into digital media literacy and translating these communication skills over.
I agree 100%. So we have given some thought to this. We do have some education focused partnerships. We are also working with UNICEF, for example, to try and incorporate some digital and media literacy education into education curriculums in some markets. Right now, the work with UNICEF is mainly focused on South Asia, kind of as a test. As you all know, working like one big entity with another big entity, we always have to move a little bit slowly so that we can get comfortable with one another. But I think we do see a really big role for not peace builders and educators in this space, especially when it comes to kind of, for lack of a better word, I say like in individuals' activism or participation in online environments, like not only as a content creator in some cases, but also as someone who is helping maintain kind of societal norms online. Our work with Search for Common Ground really focuses on this, for example, but it is like, for everyone to feel like they own, part of this community. So if you're part of a Facebook group, for example, that is your group. And just like any other group that you participate in, the offline world, you would want to ensure that group members are being civil to one another, that group members aren't threatening one another, that the conversation is civil, that there is open dialogue. And so we are really trying to promote this idea of of course, this is a Facebook platform or Instagram platform, but really it is a space that is owned by the community. It's a communally owned space like the internet is. And so it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to play a role, especially in the groups that we are part of. And so, we're looking, for example, at, group admins, people who manage large groups on Facebook, for example, working more closely with them to understand what role they can and should play in helping to moderate content, or to flag harmful content, or even just to build bridges between different members of the groups. I don't know if any of you are members of moms groups on Facebook, for example, but this actually happens in moms groups. It's a great example of peace building in a way. You have the pro-vaccine moms, the anti-vaccine moms, you have the pro-sleep training moms and the anti-sleep training moms. And then you have these group admins and people who are just really present on the platform that kind of play a role and try to bridge divides and foster conversation around these topics that is helpful and proactive without, being really divisive. And so we're really looking at that and saying, this model can and should be applied to other types of groups and formats. And then on Peace Builders, I will say my plea to you all would be just to ensure that your organization and you as an individual do have a presence online. Sometimes the actors that are promoting and pushing bad content are quite prolific, and they are present everywhere. Some of them are commercially motivated. And so we really just need to also have an army of peace builders or people in the humanitarian protection space also present online to help, kind of keep an eye on what's happening. And I will say in you're a group that is very similar to the peace building group, not exactly the same, but the humanitarian protection community, we've done some work with them too, but I'll say not consistently, it's inconsistent in terms of how present that community, for example, is online when they're doing protection risk monitoring in a community. There isn't always an equal amount of focus given on, kind of monitoring online conversations that are created and participated in by those same communities. And so I think these two things go hand in hand. And then on the virtual piece, I just want to say that we have done some projects in this space, mainly around disasters though, in helping build empathy for people who are undergoing a natural disaster. Some of our trainings are people standing in an area that is, flooding before your eyes with the VR goggles. We've done some work in wildfire zones, for example, to help people kind of walk through Paradise, California, which was burned to the ground, to build empathy for those communities. But we do see some challenges in putting somebody into a setting that they are not prepared for emotionally or mentally. So we have had conversations with partners around doing some work to build empathy for people who are in conflict settings. That has not gone anywhere, largely due to some of the concerns that are mental health related concerns about unleashing something that could be quite traumatic on someone who's not prepared for it. So, but we are doing some work, for example, in racial justice and civil rights that is focused on understanding what it's like for somebody, a person of color, for example, just to experience the same steps in daily life, but as a different person in someone else's shoes. So there are spaces where this work is being done, but it's not specifically for in conflict settings at this moment, at least as far as we're working with.
Thank you, Kylie. And thank you, Lisa, for great answers. I see we have a few other questions and comments that are popping up in the chat on the importance of framing this from the governance angle with respect to, ensuring that we're advocating policies of respect human rights and civil society space. I think, Kylie, the point you were making about linking online content to offline harm. Prabha, I know you've had your hand up patiently, so would you like to make a quick comment here?
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you for a fabulous panel. It's just wonderful. I've been listening to the last 2 days of sessions on the use of technology. And if this is sidetracking, please let me know. But I wanted to go back to something Lisa said earlier about polarization preceding social media, really. And I wonder about that because of what we are learning about the algorithms fanning and fanned by hate speech being so much more prolific. Can we really say that the polarization precedes social media activity? Are they not completely interactive, fed by the bubbles of the sites we all reach, so that they're reinforcing? So I just had a question about that because I know how thoughtful you are about what you say. So there might be more to unpack there.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I mean, I think social media is a tool. It can be used for good or bad. And the way the algorithms are designed and the economic motives behind the profit structure really tend to amplify polarization. So there's already identity cleavages in society, and those cleavages are not very great in some cases, you're right. And so it is really quite a significant wedge, but it's the way people are using social media and just sort of how those engines are churning that are, you know, polarizing.
Which for me, Azra, just leads to a follow-up, as the wonderful presenter from IBM, the vice president, spoke about. What will it take for some responsible shifts in the algorithms based on what we as peace builders and neuroscientists are sharing with social media and technology companies?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Prabha, and I think it's a great one, actually, as we want to try to take this conversation into breakouts with this, you know, really wonderful level of participation we have. Lisa Inks, I'd love to just hand over to you if you can guide everyone for what we're going to do next.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. It's been a great, fascinating discussion so far. So I'm also with Mercy Corps as the Director for Peace and Conflict, and just want to introduce some breakouts, like Azra said, so you all can really contribute your expertise to this discussion. So what we'd like to do is split into 7 groups of 7 to 9 people in each group. And I'll share in the chat a template for Google Slides where we'll be doing some group brainstorming around a few key questions. You'll have a facilitator in each group that's either one of the panelists or Azra or Mike Jobbins or myself. And so first, you know, as people give really quick introductions, if you could talk a little bit about how you see these issues playing out in your work or your context. And then we'd like, you know, based on what you've heard today and possibly, you know, other days at PeaceCon so far, you know, where do you see frameworks aligning across the tech and peace building sectors, and where are there gaps? And then we'd like, if possible, we'll have about 20 minutes total. And if you could reserve the bulk of the time to talk about some concrete solutions. So what are ways that we can collaborate across sectors to increase digital social cohesion? That would be great. Just a quick, you know, note, if you could please designate someone at the very beginning of the discussion to share out in plenary. We'd like the groups to just really quickly share maybe their top idea for collaboration moving forward. So with that, let me go ahead and link the slides. And these questions are all repeated in the slides as well. And then we'll go ahead and, yeah, give you about 15 to 20 minutes in room. So I'll go ahead and open those up. Thanks.
I guess we should stop now as people are coming back.
Okay, I thought he was, yeah. I hope we're back.
Well, thank you to my wonderful breakout group. We got into a great discussion and in a very short amount of time.
Well, I'm jealous because I couldn't get into my breakout group because my internet went off, and then Lisa could not send me to my breakout group. So on the internet where I'm actually sitting under a router in the lobby of my shop because the internet is terrible here.
Oh, sorry about that, Danjuma. I wanted to see if maybe we could go down very quickly the line, just 5 minutes left. We had 7 breakout groups. If you could share one takeaway from your group, we'd love to hear it. Starting with group 1.
Sure. We talked about a wide range of things, but one that we kept coming back to was the role of education systems and sort of the mutual equities that all of us have in media literacy, training and bringing people up, but not.
Thank you, Mike. That definitely strikes a chord. Yeah. The role of education. How about group 2?
Rachel, can you report out from our group?
Yeah, so one area that we identified was that like Finland has invested a lot in digital media literacy. A number of other government has. There's evidence that it works, and kind of, you know, how do we continue to encourage the tech companies, kind of this being a gap, and also the peace building field can do more, but basically it's just such a multi-stakeholder and broad issue that we all need to be working on this, and we aren't.
Thank you, Rachel. That's really great. How about group 3?
I can share something. No one got appointed in this group. Sharing one thing that I had suggested, listening to Kylie talk about the fact that different groups are being able to have dialogue with one another just on their own, I guess, on Facebook. You talked about 2 different groups of moms. I've been involved outside of social media context in historical conciliation work, and done that in various places in the world. Some of them before there was social media much active at all. But I think that could be adapted so that people could be trained in order how to do that. How do people deal with the fact that there are different narratives about the same events in history? And how do you bring about any kind of dialogue process online? I could envision that as being very possible. You'd probably have to train people specifically how to do it.
Thank you for that, David. Really insightful. Now turning to my group, group 4.
Yeah, we had someone first speak about working with diaspora communities, and she's seen the divisiveness and polarization that has happened due to social media. So she was wondering about a potential inoculation. And then we were lucky enough to have a younger person in our group who just explained that he couldn't, you know, imagine being without his phone, that social media just is, just like I'm talking to all of you right now. It's just the way that it is, and they know how to protect themselves. They block people, they shut people down when they don't like what they're saying. So we ended up using the road as an analogy. And, you know, do we regulate the drivers on the road, or do we just all choose to take our own separate routes, only being on the routes that we like? And then we wondered in the end if maybe the people who have grown up with this generation of social media users, if they're not the best educators, and that the rest of us have a lot to learn. So lots of questions and explorations in our group.
Wonderful summary, Courtney. And I would really second the idea of the younger generation, that, you know, this digital generation, really their potential to educate the rest of us, because they've, you know, balanced this and incorporate this so well in their lived experience. Next, how about group 5?
That's supposed to be my group, but sorry, I got knocked off. So somebody, Guy, is supposed to be our spokesman.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Eva. Guy, we'd love to hear from you.
Guy?
Yeah. I think you're on mute, Guy.
Okay, I thought I turned it off. Sorry. The thing that we focused on was the need to produce and to widely share content that presents the issues in a more positive way, that is at least as enticing as all the negative content that's out there. That the algorithms and people's psychology tends to gravitate towards posts that are really interesting and exciting, and we need to make peace that interesting and that exciting. And then as far as sharing across different sectors and different parts of the world, what we thought was it's really important when somebody comes up with a way of approaching a problem in one part of the world that really catches on, is to share that widely so people can adapt that general idea to another part of the world.
Excellent point, Guy. Thank you for that. And finally, group 6. I think group 7 got folded into the others. Would love to hear from group 6 if they're here.
We also did not appoint anybody, so I can take unless anyone wants to volunteer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're it, Kylie.
Okay. All right. We actually had a lot of discussion, and then we got to work very late. So we were throwing sticky notes on here to try and capture the discussion. But essentially, and I think this might be a divisive statement. I hope it's not. But what we said is essentially like, we do have alignment around the goal of building and enhancing social cohesion. And I know that might sound controversial, but I hope everyone here would believe me when I say that Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and other leaders at Facebook do not want to cause violence, offline. We don't want to, as a company, affect elections. And so I do believe very strongly that our goal is very consistent with your goal. We are looking to make this a safe space for everyone. And we're looking to ensure that our content or our platform and users' content doesn't affect societies in a negative way, in that it's driving violence or inciting hate against groups or communities. And so I do think that there is this, that our goal is very similar. Now, jury is still out on whether we are achieving our goal, but I think there is a consistent goal there. So we do have alignment around that. The gaps, of course, like some of the other groups, the gaps are many. Resources are not always available, and obviously resources are not always available at the same level in even at tech companies, for example. Resources that our company might have are not at the same level that resources that another company might have, especially some of the smaller tech companies. They may not have the staff, the time and the money to focus on some of these problems in the same way. But also in the peace building community, resources are a precious thing. I know from actually my work at the UN, for example, that the peace building community is constantly struggling to get donor resources, at least at that level and in that forum. So we wanted to recognize that. Partnerships are not always extensive as they should be. That's another gap. And the dialogue between peace builders and the tech industry is still nascent. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And then in terms of collaboration, we really liked the idea of this kind of exchange, like a cultural exchange, if you will, between tech and the peace building community. And so, would be excited to explore ways to make that happen. And then also just increasing collaboration overall and dialogue overall would be a goal in itself. So we put that down on the sticky.
Thank you so much, Kylie. That was right there. I think a really nice wrap up for, I think we covered a really remarkable breadth of ground in this last 90 minutes. I mean, I heard real alignment across the board in terms of, what Lisa just framed in the outset, the overall negative implications, particularly for conflict-affected countries, embracing and adopting more of a multi-stakeholder approach. So it isn't one organization, it isn't, the peace building field alone in this struggle, but really we heard in such a compelling way from Danjuma and Michelle about how they carry out this work with local officials, with youth, with technology partners like Facebook, and carry forward. I heard a really strong demand signal in terms of education, literacy. Someone made the analogy inoculating oneself. But I'm also really struck by the comment of Sever, the youngest person in our breakout session, with just the emphatic affirmation of how social media is just a reality, almost a lived experience like breathing. So for someone like me, where it's still not a vital element of my life, I think we have to really propel youth leadership in this conversation and in this response. Great ideas, I think, in terms of greater exchange. Tamara had a really nice one about more internships and more opportunities to bring young people and young experts, into greater interaction with the tech sector that way. And I'd say, peace building exchange to help support the development of some of the upstream solutions, particularly in more challenging areas such as encrypted or closed spaces where we're no longer going to have an eye into what's happening. So thank you so much to our amazing 4 panelists, Lisa, Danjuma, Michelle, and Kylie. Thank you, Lisa Inks and Mike Javins, for also your thought leadership in framing this conversation. Hope all of you can continue to carry forward in this effort with AFP, with Toda Institute. We're really happy to co-chair the Tech and Social Media Working Group for AFP. Some great resources have been shared in the chat. This session was recorded, so it will be available for folks who want to refer back to it. And thank you so much for joining us. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've got common cause and I think a map to move forward.